Ted Lindsay was one of those guys that was a feisty player on the ice. He gave it 100% all the time, and likely one of the great left wingers, if not the best left winger of them all. When he was playing with Howe and Abel, that was a line. That was a great line, and Ted Lindsay was an integral part of that.
I hated every guy I played against, and I must say that the opposition, whether it be Toronto, Montreal, New York, Boston, Chicago, they felt the same way. And this was a feeling. It was a feeling of hate. And it's a wonderful way to play hockey. No coach ever has to get you up.
5'8", 163 pounds. By every measure, Ted Lindsay had no business being the most feared man in the National Hockey League. Yet for over 2 decades, opponents did not just try to stop him, they tried to survive him. 400 stitches carved into his face, 1,808 penalty minutes, 4 Stanley Cup championships, and a war against his own front office that changed professional hockey forever. As Gordie Howe once said of his closest teammate, "If Ted saw you standing in his way, your best bet was to move before it was too late." This is the story of Terrible Ted. Picture this. Stanley Cup semifinal, 1956. Detroit Red Wings versus Toronto Maple Leafs at Maple Leaf Gardens. Before the puck even dropped, 2 Toronto newspapers received the same chilling phone call from an anonymous fan. "Don't worry about Howe and Lindsay tonight. I'm going to shoot them both." The threat was serious enough that police got involved. Word traveled all the way to Saskatchewan, where Gordie Howe's 70-year-old mother sat in terror by her radio. Most players would have asked for protection. Ted Lindsay asked for nothing. He simply got angry. Toronto led 4-2 heading into the final period. Then Lindsay took over. After Howe pulled one back, Lindsay scored the equalizer. Then, in overtime, he scored the winner. Detroit had done the impossible on enemy ice. But what happened next is what people still talk about today. As the final buzzer echoed through a stunned Maple Leaf Gardens, Lindsay flipped his hockey stick upside down, rested it on his shoulder like a rifle, and slowly skated a full lap around the ice, pretending to fire into the crowd. Coach Jimmy Skinner of the Red Wings told reporters afterward, "You cannot scare players like Howe and Lindsay. They only get angrier and play better. That caller actually helped us win." Gordie Howe, reflecting on that moment in his memoirs, wrote, "There is nothing in this world that could break him. When he did that, I knew it." Sports writer Bob Duff, author of 100 Things Red Wings Fans Should Know, called it one of the greatest acts of defiance in NHL history. And Lindsay himself said simply, "That guy wanted to shoot us. I guess I got the last shot." Not every battle Ted Lindsay fought was against a nameless threat. Some were very personal. On January 25, 1950, Detroit Olympia hosted one of the most violent individual confrontations in NHL history. The opponent was Bill Ezenicki of the Toronto Maple Leafs, a man the league already knew as Wild Bill, a player who built his entire reputation on physical intimidation. 2 of the most feared men in hockey on the same ice, with years of Detroit versus Toronto hatred fueling every shift. From the opening minutes, the 2 men went after each other. What followed was not a hockey fight. It was a war. Lindsay systematically dismantled Ezenicki, overpowering him with his fists until Ezenicki left the ice with his face covered in blood and 19 stitches closing the damage. The chaos was so extreme that referees handed out 27 penalties between both teams. NHL President Clarence Campbell was furious. He suspended both players 3 games and fined each man $300, publicly declaring that this kind of brutality had no place in professional hockey. Toronto Globe and Mail sports writer Jim Vipond wrote at the time, "Lindsay did not seem interested in scoring goals that night. He simply wanted to destroy Toronto." Ted Lindsay's face told a story that no statistics ever could. Over the course of a career spanning more than 2 decades, Lindsay accumulated what historians estimate to be over 400 stitches across his face alone. Some accounts place the real number closer to 700. At a certain point, Lindsay himself stopped counting. He never wore a facial shield. He threw himself into the most dangerous corners of every rink, every night, against the hardest men in the sport. When he needed stitches, team doctors sewed him up right there in the dressing room, often without anesthetic, so he could return to the ice as quickly as possible. Lindsay treated those moments as routine. His teammates saw something different. Red Kelly, a Hall of Fame defenseman who played alongside Lindsay for years, said, "You looked at Ted's face and you saw the history of every battle he had ever fought. He was not just a hockey player. He was a true warrior, someone who accepted blood and pain as simply part of the job." Wayne Gretzky, reflecting on that era decades later in 2019, said, "The nickname Scarface shows you everything about what he gave to this sport. Those scars were proof of a time when hockey was a fight for survival." Lindsay's own words on the subject: "I stopped counting after 400. I call it amateur plastic surgery, performed by my opponents. I would not trade a single scar for anything." Ted Lindsay was feared on the ice, but what he did off it may have taken even more courage. By the mid-1950s, Lindsay had become one of the most decorated players in the league. He had seen firsthand how team owners were profiting from rising ticket sales and early television deals, while players received minimal salaries and were left with almost nothing after their careers ended. The pension fund, players were told, was being managed responsibly. It was not. Lindsay began meeting in secret with players from rival teams, including Doug Harvey of the Montreal Canadiens, to organize what would become the NHL Players Association. In an era when players had no contracts guaranteeing rights, no agents, and no legal protection, this was an act of extraordinary defiance. When Detroit general manager Jack Adams discovered what Lindsay had been doing, he reacted with everything he had. Adams stormed into the dressing room and pressured each player individually to publicly abandon the association. Every man folded, except one. Lindsay looked Adams directly in the eye and refused. The punishment was immediate and brutal. Adams stripped Lindsay of the team captaincy, spread false rumors that Lindsay had been speaking against his own teammates, and leaked a fabricated contract to the press to make Lindsay appear greedy. Then Adams traded him to the Chicago Blackhawks, the weakest team in the league at the time, in what was effectively an exile. Jimmy Devellano, longtime executive of the Red Wings, said in 2019, "Lindsay was traded because he had the courage to challenge Jack Adams. Back then, hockey teams were run like dictatorships. Ted was the only one who dared to fight back." Gordie Howe admitted years later, "Adams tried to use me against Ted. The bravery Ted showed standing up to that man is something every player in this league owes him, even today." Lindsay never regretted a single moment of it. He said, "Adams could trade me wherever he wanted, but he could not kill the idea of fairness." Most athletes slow down at 35. Ted Lindsay came back at 39. After retiring in 1960 to work as a television broadcaster, Lindsay had been away from professional hockey for 4 full years. When Detroit Red Wings coach and general manager Sid Abel called and asked him to return for the 1964 to 1965 season, almost nobody believed it would amount to anything. They were wrong. In 69 games that season, Lindsay scored 14 goals and recorded 28 points. Impressive numbers for any returning veteran, but the number that truly defined his comeback was 173 penalty minutes. At 39 years old, Lindsay was still picking fights with players 20 years younger than him and making them regret every second of it. Sid Abel told the press, "People said I was crazy for bringing back a 39-year-old, but Ted was never old on the ice. He was still terrible Ted, the man who made opponents look over their shoulder every time they skated into the corner." Gordie Howe said it simply, Once a warrior, always a warrior. Ted Lindsay was never someone you could impress with ceremony. When he was elected to the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1966, he refused to attend the induction. The reason was simple. At the time, the event was restricted to men only. Women and children were not permitted inside. Lindsay's wife and family had sacrificed alongside him through every trade, every injury, every battle for 2 decades. If they were not allowed to witness this moment, then he would not be there either. The Hockey Hall of Fame had never encountered anything like it. No player had ever turned down the sport's highest individual honor over a matter of principle. The institution was left with no choice. The following year, the rules were changed to allow families to attend. One Hall of Fame official, quoted in historical records, acknowledged, "He was the first and only person to ever do that, and he won." In 2010, the NHL Players Association renamed its most prestigious award, voted on by the players themselves, the Ted Lindsay Award. The men who skated against him or stood on his shoulders chose his name above all others as the standard of excellence. Wayne Gretzky said in 2017, "When you look at 1,800 penalty minutes alongside nearly 400 goals in the original 6 era, you understand why he remains the model for every left wing who came after him." Terrible Ted, Scarface, the man who made the league change its rules, twice. What do you think about Ted Lindsay? Leave your comment below.